Hello, my name is Patrick Temple-West. I'm a journalist at the Financial Times in New York. I cover environmental, social, and governance issues at the FT here, and am very excited to be joining today with Professor Francisco Gaetani, coordinator of the Professional Masters in Public Administration and former Vice Minister of the Environment and Vice Minister of Planning. Also today, we're joined with Marcelo Behar, now currently Vice President of Sustainability and Group Affairs for Natura & Company, the global beauty group that comprises Avon, Natura, The Body Shop, and Aesop. He previously served in the Brazilian government in justice and as in strategic affairs as Vice Minister from 2003 to 2009, and he joined Natura in 2013. Before we begin, I just would like to say that the manifestations expressed by FGV staff and by the speakers in this event and online broadcasts represent exclusively the opinions of their authors and not necessarily FGV's institutional positions. Everyone in this event agreed to participate spontaneously. Therefore, they authorized the use of their image for this transmission that will be available later on FGV's official channels. Marcelo, how about I kick it over to you? Would you like to give a few opening remarks?
Yes. Hello, Patrick. How are you? Hello, Professor Gaetani. Hello to everyone who listened to us. So just for my initial remarks, I was asked to give a few ideas and to set the standards for what Natura's history is all about. I'll do that in a few moments. So first of all, just a few words on my happiness to be with you, to both of you, and let's have a good discussion with my dear friend, Professor Gaetani. So do you, now moving on to a little bit to Natura's history, and then I think we can create a dialogue. So I'd like to present a few important landmarks for the company. I don't know how familiarized everyone is. Natura was a company that was founded back in 1969 in the city of São Paulo, Brazil, where it was since the beginning a cosmetic company, but in a moment where the cosmetic industry was really set and was the mindset of the whole cosmetic industry was really driven by the whole chemical industry and the advances of chemical industry. And Natura was back then already in the vanguard, telling that natural ingredients would be what would make the company unique. So Natura was already set on a standpoint of the values of the 60s and the values of nature being valued and all the mentality of a more general society that would spread in the years to come. Back in 1974, from a business standpoint, and here FGV is a school of business, so that's a very important perspective, Natura was no longer a small shop in São Paulo, but decided to adopt a new business model, a business model that would include many people and that would differentiate itself by adopting a business model that was very similar to what Avon used to practice back then in 1974, which was the traditional direct selling model. So Natura would sell to a consultant, the consultant would have a percentage for her, and she would sell to her customers the products from Natura. That really shifted the whole landscape for Natura, and that really shifted the model, and the company started to expand more and more. Throughout that expansion, the founders of Natura always considered that the values that they carry in the company were very important and very dearly. And Natura in Latin America was certainly the first one to use refile packaging back in the 80s and really start to adjust the business mentality to be more connected to environmental and the word back then was not sustainability, but to have more concerns for the production than any other company that was in the competition back then. In 1992, that's a very important landmark for Brazil as a whole, because as you all remember, Brazil hosted the UN Conference for Environment, and the ECHO 92 gave a lot of different dimensions to the Brazilian society, Brazilian economy, and that really inspired Natura to make its business out of the Brazilian biodiversity and not to do what other competitors from the cosmetic sector were doing, but to do something unique out of the products that we had in Brazil. And with that, with a lot of research, a lot of technology being applied, in 2000, Natura launched its first line out of the Amazon and started really doing a work that became very consistent with the Amazon region. That line was called Echoes. Echoes line use nowadays 38 different ingredients out of the Brazilian biodiversity. And I think that's, whenever you talk to a Brazilian around Natura, certainly one of the lines that people really do remember, do recap, is the Ecos line, because Ecos line is a line of products that take the biodiversity into the jar. And so what makes the business really sustainable is not only having a connection with the Amazon, working with communities, but placing that inside the business model. I think here, for those who are in a business school, it's interesting to give just one quick example out of Ukuuba. The Ukuuba tree is a tree that used to be in the verge of extinction inside the Amazon, because the tree used to be used in the southern part of Brazil to produce broomsticks and to produce roofs for houses. So the communities used to take away and to chop the Ukuuba tree to sell them for those purposes, and they used to have around 12 reais per tree. So that was the amount of money that a community would have if they would sell the tree. Natura got into the region, studied, took a look what could be done with that species, and found out that its seeds had a great hydrating power. So using half of the seeds that a tree produces per year, the company was able to pay 3 times more for the community, so 36 reais per year per tree. So what the community did was, instead of chopping the tree down, they started to replant the tree in order to have more production, to sell more products, and to begin a different process. And so that, just for the Ukuuba tree, reverted the process from extinction from the tree in the region of Pará, which is a very practical example on how the use of biodiversity can really ally business and ally a way to maintain nature as standing with nature-based solutions to create a business model that it's possible. And it's possible not only for the company, but also for the communities and for the ecological services that they provide, both on biodiversity and on carbon. So I think that explains quite well how the Ecos line operates. Besides that, I think running a little on the story of Natura and moving a few years later, the company really reached a very good position in the Brazilian market, and it became the leader in the cosmetic sector and personal hygiene in the Brazilian market. And then it started to understand that even being the 4th biggest market in the world for that, we were only present in Brazil and in a few countries in Latin America. So it was time to really go overseas and expand and seek new partners that would have the same philosophy as Natura has. Back then, we already had in place all the metrics for sustainability. So we had GRI in place. We were already initiating our journey with everything that's regarding B Corp. So we became the first B Corp, public traded B Corp in the world, and certainly the biggest in Latin America. And in 2012, we started our international approach, and Natura did the acquisition of an Australian brand called Aesop. Aesop is a brand that back then operated already in 15 countries. It was still a more niche, a different marketing approach, but with a very sustainable approach as well, both in its formulations and in the way that they connected with society. So I don't know how familiar as you are, nowadays Aesop operates in 26 countries. Whenever you step in an Aesop store, you are connecting to the local, not only architecture and community and the mindset of the people who are gathered on that place. So the Aesop, the people who work on an Aesop store, they're not only vendors, so they're not only consultants, but they are connected to human sciences, and they connect the whole community where the store is located with the brand itself. That's very rich, that's very unique, that's what really took Natura's attention to the brand, and that was the first partnership we did with an external and a different brand. The second one was a very important example for both business and sustainability, which was the Body Shop. So the Body Shop was founded by Dame Anita Roddick here in the United Kingdom in the 70s. And it was always connected to environmental, also to the environmental aspect and to communities as well. So Dame Anita Roddick used to say, and I love that sentence from her, that whenever people would see a shelf full of products, she would see a shelf full of possibilities for healthcare, education, community needs, because the Body Shop used to operate in that same model. So taking ingredients from traditional communities, providing fair trade, providing different capabilities, and spreading sustainability throughout its products. As you know, the Body Shop, many of you know the brand. I don't know how many know its history, but the Body Shop was sold to a different company in 2007 and somehow lost track of its sustainability approach for a few years. And then when Natura decided to really go overseas in 2017, we did the acquisition of the brand, and the Body Shop became part of the group, and then Natura & Co was founded. So that made us really a global player in the cosmetic world, operating different geographies with different brands. And this year, Natura did another movement, acquiring a brand that is very well known in many geographies, which is Avon. Avon is a very traditional cosmetic brand, over 130 years of history, was the founder of the direct selling model. So Avon is a brand that when women were not allowed to vote, they had the possibility to have their own money, their own way of living, and to have independence from their husbands and their fathers. So it was really throughout its history a brand that really provided women empower and empowered communities. This year, when we united the four brands, we launched a new vision, a vision for where we see the company going to the next 10 years, where we want to go. The four brands, now with over 6 million consultants and representatives, with over 34,000 employees, more than 3,000 stores in over 100 countries. So we set a few standards. The first one was on sustainability for the environmental aspect. So we said to ourselves that we are going to address the climate crisis and protect the Amazon. And I think that's something that's sort of unique for a cosmetic brand to do, which is to really have one of the most important biological systems in the world being seen for a brand that will drive attention, time, resources, and foster collective efforts towards zero deforestation. Our target is to try to do that by 2025. Of course, Natura is not going to do anything alone. So despite the fact that by our business model, we are currently protecting 1.8 million hectares, which is sort of the size of half Holland, it's not enough. It's not even close to be enough. And no matter what we do, it won't be sufficient. So Professor Gaetani and myself, we are connected to an initiative called Consultation for the Amazon, where we unite not only different companies, but also public sector, academia, scientists, and many others within the public space to join efforts and to try to set some standards for measuring deforestation, but above all, to provide new economic opportunities for them and for the region, as I've mentioned in the Ukuba example. I think that's what we are looking for to develop in different ways. In the first pillar of what we see for the next 10 years, I've also mentioned that we have some climate targets, and we are stating that we will become net zero 20 years ahead of the UN agreement that said that companies should become net zero by 2050. So Natura & Co is stating that, and we are not only stating, we are shifting all processes, we're shifting all the way that we do logistics, and we are really fostering a lot of efforts on packaging to become net zero by 2030 on scopes 1, 2, and 3. So the hard part of it is to become net zero on scope 3, and that's where we are placing most of our abilities and capacities. Finally, there is something that maybe we could discuss later on with Professor Gaetani, which is we as a company are also trying to foster the efforts towards building a model for biodiversity as we have for carbon. So as you all know, for carbon, there are science-based targets that are agreed and that are being placed, not for biodiversity, not for the loss of nature. So we as a company are trying to set the patterns and to talk to science-based targets community to shape what loss of nature would look like on a model that is agreed between private sector, academia, and governments. On the pillar of social development, we stand that we will defend human rights and we will be humankind. That means that for our associates, we will provide gender equality, both of representation and remuneration by 2023. We will provide the inclusion of underrepresented groups by 30% in the next 10 years. So depending, and that's a long discussion, as we are based in and now as we operate in over 100 countries, it depends on the fabric of the society from each geography, but we are stating that we are going to provide on 5 categories the inclusion of those who are underrepresented. We are also going to measure the increases in terms of health and education for our networks. So at Brazil, we already started with the Human Development Index of our consultants. So measuring how they are in Brazilian society and how they become after they become a nature consultant. Finally, there is the whole question of the supply chain and the intolerance against human rights infringements throughout our supply chain. So we are going to be really radical on not only what our main communities that we source from, that they are in the best human rights practices, but also those who are in our long supply chain, they will also be measured on those tracks. And finally, just to wrap up and to listen to Professor Gaetani, I think the last dimension is the new economy and how we foresee the economy moving to embrace circularity and regeneration. We don't see that that consumer goods will be produced as they are today. So we will provide full circularity of packaging in the next 10 years. 95% of our ingredients will be either renewable or natural. 95% of them will also be biodegradable. And we will provide major investment and collaborative actions towards regenerative solutions, which we think is the only way that we'll be able to move on with everything that we need. So it's no longer for companies just to try to do less harm or to not to be to provide any negative externalities, as the economic perspective used to call, but we must become net positive in many dimensions. And just to wrap all this up, we call that to provide regenerative solutions and to regenerate where we source from, where we produce, and the way we operate. So that's the perspective for Natura & Co. In a glance, in a big lens, but I think that's the summary of our both history and how we foresee the decade of action that we are just starting.
Great, thank you, Marcelo. Professor Gaetani, any remarks from you?
Professor Gaetani, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
The most popular sentence of the year. Anyway, Natura is a model, it's a role model for Brazilian companies. But in the field of higher education, business education, Getúlio Vargas Foundation is a kind of old lady. It's a 76 years old institution in Brazil, which is a lot of time. And we are the leading institution in terms of business school, schools of government, and think tank. What we're trying to do, and the secret of the success of the Getúlio Vargas Foundation, is the capacity to reinvent itself in order to address the market needs and the government needs. As you know, Brazil has gone through several changes in the last decades, and the country still has a shortage of qualified higher executives in government and in the private sector, in the third sector. In the past, we were used to form people to the bureaucracy and firms. Now you have to form people to work everywhere, to work in high-level in multinationals, top international negotiations, local government, private philanthropy. So the background that we are trying to prepare our students for is much more diversified. And the school has somehow found a way to mix this sort of formation. We have 10 schools. We have the leading areas in economics and public administration, government. So we think that the Getúlio Vargas Foundation today provides a variety of possibilities for modern times. We are facing several difficulties in the public higher education market. The private market has other sort of difficulties, and the foundation has been able to somehow update itself in order to follow up and to work together and to innovate and to match the needs of national and international companies, and at the same time work very closely with several governments independent of their party lines. The school was founded during the transition to a Vargas authoritarian regime to the democracy in 1944. It was deeply influenced by the American public administration progressive era. And today we have a much more diversified group of alliances. We have established partnerships with American schools, with European schools, with Oriental schools, because we think that in order to integrate Brazil in the world, Brazil was a very closed country until more or less the 90s. We need to receive students, we have to send students, we have to develop exchange programs, research programs, in order to integrate ourselves in the world. We cannot behave as a big island in South Atlantic anymore, which was somehow the image that the country acquired for a certain period of time. And the school has to match what's going on in the best schools in the world. And that's have been our efforts now. It's hard to believe, but I was very surprised in March when the COVID erupted. The school was ready, not for COVID, but we had just organized the school in order to put distance learning at the core of our agenda. So we had several programs ready to be launched to achieve remote regions of the country, professions that people can't go to work, couldn't have difficulty in going to work because of mobility problems. So when the pandemic came, we just turned the key. Obviously, there were adaptations required. We had to interact with teachers, students, in order to provide the support. But in terms of business model, in terms of ICT, in terms of the attitude of the school moved as a whole towards another moment in a very impressive way. Even for us teachers, we didn't know that we were so prepared for this moment. Also, it was a very different experience because what's happening in education today, everything is changing. No rules anymore. These are the current rules, no rules. You have to address people from different generations. You have to prepare them for the market. You have to train, form professionals who are already working. And you have to work with people from different generations, which means that their ICT skills are very diversified. I had an experience 3 months ago teaching for one of our global programs, students from France, US, Germany, Singapore. And then we moved the course to an online platform. And I was beginning explaining to our students, well, we have to see, it's not the same thing in a presential class, but we have to do our best. And then I asked the students, what do you miss more in a distance learning class? And then suddenly a student answered, nothing. I was completely speechless. Nothing. Yes, because we're used to. We have always studied in this way, and these are no news for us. So these poses questions that we have to address and find a balance. Now the default model is the distance, but we're losing the tacit production of knowledge, the co-production of knowledge, the exchange of life experience with colleagues, but we're adapting. At the same time, the school works very close to the government, the national government, the state governments, and the local governments in order to support their needs, mainly in economics and public management issues. The market, the school, our most prestigious market school is in business school is in São Paulo. It formed generations of professionals in Brazilian companies. We have a network of somehow hundreds of 200, almost 300,000 of students that they took the MBA in the Getúlio Vargas Foundation. These are massive numbers. And we're trying now, also following the example of our partners in the North, how to work with this alumni network. The school is a community. The school is a pool of knowledge. And we are trying to make the best with what we have now, using this network and in order to innovate for the future. The school works as a holding, we have law schools, history schools, social science, economics, management. And we think that today it's a wonderful opportunity to change. You probably know the expression, never waste a crisis. We think that we are very confident that we are emerging from the crisis better. We are adapting, we are innovating, we are providing quality, we are providing exceptional services, we are providing connections in a moment that most schools are somehow closing down in their own self, in their own business. We think that the school is one of the most connected institutions in Brazil. It works with private sector, government, the military sector. We have a strong partnership with the military since the beginning of the school. So this sort of innovative arrangements, they help us in order to connect and to work in a global stage. The school has international relations programs. We have formed several of our diplomats. And we think that today we are able to go on innovating and somehow becoming younger and younger. Some of the teachers are not so young like myself, but the school, it's fresh. It has a sort of, it's appeal, it captivates the attention of young students from Rio, São Paulo, Brasilia, and the whole country that come to study in these areas, in these sites, in this campus, because it's a wonderful learning experience. Our buildings, we somehow managed to adapt and to incorporate the best architecture solutions from the North also. Now we are reinventing this because of the ICT revolution and the digital learning process. And we think that somehow we are adapting ourselves to the future, facing the future as an opportunity, as a wonderful chance to make better, to provide better courses, to form better students, and to work knowledge in better basis. The country in a very tough moment in today. We are in the middle of a very complex economic crisis, but the school is somehow apart. We are doing our job and we are preparing for the future as if this was just one government as many others, and we have to work with them as in a democracy, you have to work with the government of the day. And that's really a pleasure. It is not a common thing in Brazil, can't take it for granted, but it's part of our current reality. So Getúlio Vargas Foundation now, it's a sort of a global hub in Brazil that we somehow achieve through outreach, different innovative institutions in the world in order to keep updated with the pace of change that we're facing in the current times. We are now facing in EU, for instance, you have the EU Green Deal. We are talking to we are providing some new development programs based on sustainability. The 2030 agenda is a global agenda, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. We think that we have to combine green, digital, inclusiveness. These three angles in order to compete. The ESG revolution, environment, social, governance principles that are now being internalized by the market, revealed that even the financial sector, the global financial sector, internalized the principle of sustainability. And we are trying to organize the school in order to, in our private branch, in our governmental branch, to work under this basis. We are facing times for huge change. And environmental principles now are not a matter of environmentalists. This became mainstream. So we are mainstreaming these concepts in our programs. We're making part of our education experience. We're making part of our research experience, because that's what all organizations should try to do now, private, public, third sector, and we think that we can't avoid this. So we're just fulfilling our mission, introducing the sense of purpose in the long term in everything we're doing, and we are very happy with the results so far. Well, that's just an introduction.
Sorry about that. Now I caught myself. Thank you, Professor. Appreciate your comments there. Marcelo, I'd like to pivot back to you about some of the things that you were saying this year. Obviously, the coronavirus pandemic has thrown a lot of the best laid plans into disarray. I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about how Natura has handled the pandemic. How has this maybe presented some opportunities for the company, and what challenges has it provided for the company as well? What things might you be struggling with these days on the sustainability front? I mean, looking at how it may have presented opportunities for your sustainability efforts and presented some challenges as well.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Patrick. And well, COVID is probably a landmark in our lifetimes, right? So it's a landmark for the world, and probably, well, sustainability is interconnected with everything. And first of all, I think it has been terrible in the sense of what it has done to lives and to livelihoods. So we've experienced in our network many losses as everyone else. And I think we are all, when COVID hit, we got together and we thought about what our message should be and our practice should be. And we thought that the best thing was to say to everyone in our networks that it's time to care, really to care about each other and to care about how we will be dealing with that new challenge. So that's the first aspect, which is the terrifying one, that it's a disease, that it's serious, that it should be tackled with science and medical clarity and not with false assumptions and not to get political on things that should be medical. So that was our first approach. Secondly, I think you have the collateral of it, right? So it does have other effects besides the epidemic in itself. And I think as the way we see it, from one hand, everyone had to care about it, but on the other hand, it showed our strengths as well as society, as a company, etc. Because it unified. So the way that we are doing our live today, you based in New York, I'm here in London, Professor Gaetani at his house in Brasileira. So that same principle is applying to every aspect of our organization. So it really integrated much more these 4 brands that were already getting in place, but now they are more than ever integrated. So I think the integration of society was we were just able to do that also to the miracles of technology. So I think everyone saw the documentary about the dilemma of social media, and part of the dilemma is that there is a miracle that really unifies everyone and that creates a way for us to work together in different geographies. So that's the good part of it. The other good part of COVID and sustainability is that we saw a world crisis live for probably quite a while. We haven't seen such a phenomenon. And now it's easier for people to understand what the climate crisis is all about as well. It's another one, like this one, much worse, that will come unless we do something. And that's serious, and that has nothing to do with marketing or spreading ideas. Or it's a serious crisis, and companies and countries do have a major role to play on that crisis. We had a seminar last year in Princeton University in the US, where the computers from Princeton, they modeled what would happen to the Amazon if deforestation continues. And what was interesting about it, and I had never witnessed that and never seen that in any study that I read before, was that the consciousness of what will happen with the Paris Agreement only works if we have all the tropical forests standing as they are. If we are taking them away, the whole math of the Paris Agreement ruins. It doesn't come alive. So it doesn't matter what others do unless those who hold the tropical forests not only stop deforesting them, but start regenerating them. So COVID allows us to understand broad concepts and broad principles like this, and to make connections that were unheard before, of things that we thought that had no connection to each other. And now when you see a disease that started in one side of the world, hitting the whole world at once, that's the same principle that will occur to the climate crisis. And we're not talking about only having more visibility to sustainability, but giving more practice to it. People got consciousness of how much they use in carbon. Do you have to really travel that much? Do you have to use that car that much? Is there other ways to do things that are simple, such as shopping? And e-commerce played a major role in that. And what we have seen, just finalizing my last comment, is that companies had a different role to play for society as well. So when the COVID crisis started, we were already an essential producer of soap, which is one of the things that stopped the virus from spreading. So we enlarged our soap production, but we were not producing alcohol gel, which is something very important for medics and for the health area. So we shift our fragrances line into alcohol gel to provide what was necessary at that moment. And I think consciousness of movements like this, and we supported many health facilities with our products for on a moment that was almost as a call for, was not almost, it was really a call for help, and that companies must play a role in that. So I think that's the long answer. The short answer is, besides the weakness, I think it always also shows the strengths of both sustainability and doing business in a very conscious way.
Great. Thank you. Marcelo, I also wanted to ask about something in your opening remarks there. Natura is a B Corporation. That's actually how I learned about Natura. Your company is one of the rare instances of a publicly traded B Corporation. I wanted to see if you could unpackage that a little bit for people, because I don't think they may not understand, number one, what a B Corp is, and number two, what the significance of a publicly traded B Corp means, because it does require you to hold the company to higher sustainability standards and adhere to them rather than just give lip service to something. I mean, it really has some requirements behind it. So if you could talk a little bit about the B Corp designation status, and then what the significance of that might mean.
Thank you so much, Patrick. So B Corp stands for benefit corporation. So beneficial corporations are those who have on their legal status not only to provide revenues to their shareholders, but also to provide results on the economical and environmental and social perspectives with the same pattern, so with the same importance. So we have, and we change our legal status in order to do so. So that's important and that's the main difference of being, and what is hard to do in a public traded company, because then you have the General Assembly, they have to vote and they have to say, yes, go on that direction. Yeah. It will be beneficial for everyone. And we understand when an economic result is not in place, or it is a little bit delayed in order to achieve an environmental result or a social one. So we explained it to our shareholders, and they agreed, and it was, we changed our legal status back in 2014, and Natura became the first public traded B Corp in the world. And now, after, it's not only about changing the status, so it's a certification that provides over 180 questions on different dimensions of your business. And unlike other patterns of comparison, they score where you are, and they say how good you are in terms of governance, how good you are in terms of carbon, how you're managing your water, how you are really spreading wealth throughout your network. So all those dimensions are placed into account, and then you are giving a number. Bless you. And so what it's really new, I think, besides being the first public traded company, is that with all those international movements that Natura did, so the Body Shop and Aesop, they are also becoming B, and we place them on the same track. So recently, 15 days ago, we just announced that Aesop became probably the biggest Australian B Corp. So nowadays we have the Body Shop being a UK-based B Corp, and Aesop also becoming a B Corp in Australia. So all those companies, they are on the same journey as Natura is, not only disclosing their results, but placing and doing business in a different way. So just to give a quick example, that is something that is rare for, I think, Brazilian companies to think about, is how can we influence the way others provide opportunities for different dimensions of the business. So I've explained the model for Natura and the Amazon region, but now Aesop is doing something very similar with the indigenous population of Australia. So they just did the same program in the way that we do with Ukuba. They did it with the sandal oil with indigenous Australians, and they are also paying for access benefits and sharing benefits with communities. So that's a way of doing business that puts together not only the economic result, but also the social result that implies, in a way that is very visible and it's comparable to others. So we hope that will create a movement of companies that are not only saying that they're doing things differently, but they are measuring what they're saying, and they are giving scores to that. So with that, consumers, we hope one day, will look at two similar products, and they will say that, well, this pen costs 2, but it costed 80 cents for the environment. And this pen also costs 2, but it costed 10 for the environment. So I would pick this one. It's less harmful for the environment. Or one day even, they will say, well, this one actually is positive for the environment because we took away all the plastic ocean for that. There are other aspects. So if that becomes visible besides the economic price, and we have the other prices being placed into account, I think that's the path to go. And that's where B Corp certification is really putting a lot of effort to. And I think it's a growing movement. You nowadays see companies like Patagonia, Danone becoming more and more B. Yeah, inside Unilever, you have a brand like Ben & Jerry's that is also a big company. So we welcome all of them, and we think that it's very good to see also competition becoming more and more B.
Yeah, that was the article we did earlier this year, was on the trend in more public companies becoming B Corps. But Natura was a leader in this space before it really kind of accelerated this year. Professor Gaetani, I wanted to see if you had any thoughts on what Marcelo said in terms of the coronavirus developments for the company, and if you have thoughts on the B Corp, sort of the sustainability enthusiasm, how the B Corp model might be able to provide some rigor behind that.
Well, it's changing the nature of our programs. The sustainability track of our master's programs now, of international cooperation programs, it's an imperative. Because in the past, we had kind of a movement towards social responsibility, social environmental report. This is not the case. We're talking about changing the DNA of the organizations, of the firms, globally. Because all these transformations Marcelo mentioned, they are rated internationally. We're talking about pension funds, asset management, family office, all these sort of investors now, they interact with Brazilian companies, checking this and also they expect Brazilian companies to help them to innovate and to change their practices. The SDGs platform, which was one of the best outcomes of Rio Plus 20, organized by the Brazilian government in 2012, it changed the nature of the business, of the supply chains. So now, we, of course, when we talk about COVID, we are on the same page. But when we talk about sustainability also, the markets are all on the same page. And they are moving fast in this direction. We're talking about value, the supply chains. We're talking about certification. We're talking about cleaning houses in terms of how to clean their company, having evidence that they are doing the best. Take the case of meat in Brazil, which is, we are the biggest world exporters of meat. Now the biggest producers, they have to certify the origin of the meat because of social activism and because of the nature of the business change. You want to eat meat, okay, but not for those responsible for deforestation of Amazon. Take mining, same story. Take several sorts of business, logistics, highways. The supply chain now, you have to clean it. You have to certify it. And you have to form people to work in the government and the private firms to this work. This is not a matter of choice, of beliefs, of values. This is business. It's strictly business. And those who don't comply, they will be pushed out of business. It's a matter of time. Today, most of the financial sector in Brazil particularly, the biggest champion of environmental policy in Brazil, in the complex situation we are going through, is the central bank. How? Well, he's responding to Basel, to what's going on in the financial global market. So the story about the green swans, etc., things are changing from the market and from the financial sector. Why? Credit generates growth. Credit is the blood of the economy. And if credit demands cleaning, sustainability, the whole economy is now adapting, is doing the best to adapt to this new reality. And we have to prepare people to this market. We have to form people for this companies, for Brazilian companies, multinational companies, Brazilian government, local governments, in order to compete, in order to be profitable, in order to comply, in order to be sustainable. People, they have to understand it not as a matter of belief, of values, but as a matter of imperative, business imperative. In terms of business sustainability, only the companies that comply to this new reality will really survive in the middle and long term. We have many angles to discuss this. The urban agenda is different from the natural resource agenda, but we are talking about energy. We are talking about transport. We are talking about mining. We are talking about industry. We are talking about agribusiness. If you take Brazilian agribusiness, you have one part of our Brazilian agribusiness, they already realized that if we have a sustainable agriculture, this can be a parameter for trade negotiations that we should use more frequently. If we comply to our credit to our rural environmental registry, if we have a sustainable agriculture, we're competing in very different bases than other countries that are not competing, adopting these standards. I'm not saying that this is the majority of our ruralist mindset yet, but we're moving in this direction. So the country, that's the best differentiated advantage of Brazil in international trade. We can be a sustainable production country in all sorts of sectors that we produce here. This makes a difference for Brazil and for the world. No country resigns its possibilities of growth, but we can grow differently. We can grow under sustainable standards. More than half of the Brazilian territory needs to be explored, occupied. We have something like 10% of the population occupying 50% of the territory. So Brazil has a unique opportunity of growing in a different way. And that's one of the most important agendas of the country. And the world is looking. Europe, US, China, Japan, all these countries are now discussing with us how to manage, how we can improve this. Because this is not a Brazilian problem. It's an opportunity for the world. And as Marcelo mentioned, the Amazon, if we do it properly, we will have a model for many other countries, not only in Brazil. Take Colombia, Peru, take what's happening in Africa. Sooner or later, we'll have the opportunity to discuss this in many other places of the world. So it's a radical change in the business model of a country, but also of the private sector, pushed by the financial sector.
Great, thank you, Professor. How have you seen a change in attitudes among the students? I'm wondering what of the students. What can you tell us about their interest in this over the years? Is this something that you're seeing pick up, and what are they hoping, if they are showing interest in this, how are they hoping to translate into jobs, into the job market in the years ahead after
Excellent
graduation?
question. These changes, these are changes that have been pushed by the young generation. It's like stop smoking. The son, the daughter forced the father. My stepdaughter, her fight against plastic, I feel a criminal all the time. I change my habits because of family habits. You have to change, and it comes from them. It's their future. It's their planet. So somehow I think that the youth generation, they have a different angle to discuss these things. They just don't negotiate. It's a matter of principle for them. And they want to study these things. They want to work with these institutions. If you look to the companies that they are trying to work, they are top ranked in sustainable principles because they don't conceive the world a different way. The public sector, even the judiciary, which is the most conservative and slow power, they have been forced to take decisions pressured by the new habits of young people, and that the society buys and the media buys and now the financial sector bought. So I would say that this sort of revolution, habits revolution, is pushed by a generation shift.
Good, yeah, thank you. And Marcelo, how are you seeing that in terms of recruitment, in terms of potential employees? How might sustainability and the ESG themes be factored into job interviews?
Yeah, Patrick. So regarding our colleagues and those who are willing to join our 4 brands, I would say that sustainability is becoming more and more an imperative, much more than just a value, because people do not want to work in a place where they see, well, most of them, I would say. And we track not only those who are coming, and I would say we had job opens with thousands of applicants, because people really want to join and to do something that is connected to their values and to what they really believe. And they want to do that with their lives. So I think it's, on one hand, very helpful for both, for them and for the company, to have people who are truly connected to it. And I don't know if you guys know, but in Natura, sustainability is also connected to the bonuses that we pay to everyone. So if we don't reach sustainability targets, we don't pay the bonus. And it happened already. 1 year, we were far from our carbon index, and no bonuses were paid. So that's how serious you deal with the matter, and that's how important the matter is to the company. So we all are bounded by sustainability somehow, and we want to make that more and more clear. So that really passions people who are beginning their careers, because they want to get their life connected to something more than what's in the paycheck. There is much more in life than what's in the paycheck. So I think the other dimension is the young consumers, right? So not only for those who work with us, but we also measure in terms of market how the consumers are behaving and how they see and how much sustainability is important to them. And the importance throughout the years has only been growing, especially in major markets. What we see is that consumers, and once I even witnessed, I was in of course, it was more a very privileged situation. It was a Whole Foods store. A couple was in front of a shelf, and the guy just picked something, and his partner asked him, but have you checked if it's B? So B Corp is already in California in people's minds to get sure that what they're purchasing does have a B certification on it. And that's a trend. I don't think it's already happening, but I think that's where it's heading to. That's where more and more future will look like, hopefully.
Great, and that's a good point on the compensation. I mean, you don't want money to be the only thing people think about, but it does drive incentives. I think what you were saying about tying compensation, the bonuses, to sustainability, environmental metrics, and that's something that we're seeing more and more of. I've written about that trend as well, but sometimes those metrics can be a bit fuzzy, and it's they can interpret them any way they want to get the bonus. But it sounds like you've and Natura kept them really quite rigorous, and there have been instances where bonuses have not been paid out when metrics have not been hit. That just, again, the same thing as the B Corp example, provides some rigor behind what the company is saying, and it's not all just lip service and talking about doing nice, green, sustainable things for the environment, but putting some rigor behind that. So I think that's a really important theme, and something that we'll be following here at the FT going forward. Professor Gaetani, do you have any thoughts on that front about how companies might be incentivizing employees, executives, boards to be looking at the sustainability area, embedding that into the business philosophy, the business requirements more wholeheartedly? Is that something that you're seeing? Is that something that you've been thinking about?
Well, you mentioned about aligning the incentives. And we're talking usually about carrots and sticks. And most companies, they already internalize this sort of incentives. As Marcelo mentioned, in terms of bonus, the government usually, the regulators take care of the sticks usually. They force the companies to move also. But I think that we should also use the sermons more frequently. It's a matter of persuasion, because once you are persuaded that that's the right thing, and consumers, in our system, consumers, they are kings. If they realize that that's what they want to feel guilty because they are promoting the deforestation of Amazon, destroying regions with mining, over exploiting fishes, repertoires. So if you persuade people, they don't need to be, you don't need to use sticks and carrots. Obviously, the trick is to combine the three, the tricks, the carrots, and the sermons. And governments also are part of this process, because the governments can help firms to do this movement. We are going now, take the European Union commitment of 2050, China 2060, Japan, Korea 2050. All the world is restructuring the whole industrial plant of the world. And we're talking about another fabric, another tissue. So we are going for a moment of major structural change. And we need to do it together. We need to support each other. We need to do creating transition rules. This is not being against business. On the contrary, we are in a moment now that this sort of concern, they are not an environmental issue anymore. This is development. This is business. This is pushing the markets. So we're going for a situation that the financial sector, the agribusiness sector, the industrial sector, the services sectors, we are all together transforming our plants, our supply chains. And schools, universities, consultants, we are all marching towards the same goal. And we have to move faster, because as Marcelo mentioned in the beginning, the pace of climate change is accelerating. We're failing miserably in trying to in keeping the temperature down. And in this domain, take the Arctic or take Amazon, you have irreversibility issues. Once you destroy, even if you restore, it's not the same. Take the Arctic, it's gone. It's gone. So these situations we have to face together. These are collective action problems. But we're not talking about states, nations. We're talking about nations, we're talking about companies, we're talking about civil society, supranational institutions, and you have to conciliate, calibrate the speed. I say, these are the rails, the tracks. And now you regulate the wave and the speed, but the tracks are given. So it's a matter for a collective effort towards this process of making this transition work.
Very good. Thank you, Professor. And Marcelo, do you have any thoughts about what you're looking forward to in 2021? I mean, still a few more weeks left of 2020 here, but I'm wondering if you're already taking a look at the new year and what opportunities, what things you might be hoping to accomplish in 2021, building on your progress on these fronts this year. Anything that you're looking at, maybe taking on new challenges for the new year, things you maybe because of the pandemic or something we're not able to quite hit on this year. I'm just wondering, it's already that season where folks are taking a look at what can be done, what they can accomplish in 2021.
So Patrick, as many others, we just finished our process of planning for next year and for the 3 next years, actually. I think for Natura & Co, what we'll be seeing will be, this year wasn't a year that we saw as a year that was postponed or that we delayed any progress. On the other hand, I think it was all the way around. We really advanced on sustainability metrics. We took the time to be together virtually, combining all the business to really set our targets for the next 10 years. And we know where we want to be year by year. So in order to accomplish that, many things will occur next year. For Natura & Co, I think there will be, of course, the metrics for carbon in science-based targets for brands will be set in place. We'll start working on the social, fulfilling the gender gap and the equity pay for the next 2 years. So I think that will be important. Inclusion will be in our hand as well. So to be more inclusive. But I think what we should really look for next year is what will happen as society and how we will help the discussions on 2 major things that connects myself and Professor Gaetani and all of us, which are the whole carbon discussion for COP26 that will happen in Glasgow next year. So I think, as I'm always saying, if we reach any agreement on carbon, it's better than to have no agreements on carbon. And as Professor was stating a few minutes ago, I think we're far from that. We are failing really, really hard. And we are failing in a way that is unacceptable for future generations and to ourselves. Because we have to set some very basic things on how the Paris Agreement should work. Hopefully now, with the change of direction that the US has taken and probably coming back to the Paris Agreement and sponsoring some extra efforts on that can be now thought as something feasible. So I think that's one. I think reaching some common ground for carbon is something that we'll be devoting a lot of time to help out as a private sector company that is inside that discussion, not only measuring carbon, but creating nature-based solutions that make ourselves different from others and try to help to really shape that framework. The other one, which I think is even more close to Natura, is the biodiversity that we talked a little bit, but there will be a meeting in China in which a biodiversity agreement, like we have for carbon, can be at least discussed, if not voted here, at least it really evolved, because China is a major biodiversity area, and the use and conservation of nature will depend on Chinese decisions as well. So hopefully this year in the Conference of Parties for Biodiversity, we'll be able to evolve a little bit from where we are, which is only like a protocol being forced here and there without really without really enforcement in many geographies, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of models that do not really work to measure the laws of nature. So we will be placing a lot of time and efforts from Natura & Co to try to build something for biodiversity as well. I think from the many denominators from sustainability for 2021, those two would be the ones that I would pick up to say we hope to see some positive outcome.
Great, thanks. Okay, gentlemen, any final thoughts here? Anything else that you'd like to discuss? Things that I should have asked you but didn't?
Just to make one point, using the Marcelo last example, we had the opportunity in Brazil to innovate and establish a new regulatory framework for exploiting genetic assets, and at the same time sharing the benefits with the indigenous tribes and traditional communities about this knowledge. Brazil subscribed the Nagoya Protocol recently, but what we learned from this process mainly was that the best form to protect is to produce. So if we find a way that we can produce, and at the same time preserving, at the same time protecting in fully some areas, protecting in a granular way, in a transition way others. If we find a way to provide sustainable basis for development, we can grow calmly, inclusively, in a green way, and we have the technology to do these things today. It's not a matter of technology. Science is in our side. Science is helping, but we have to find political solutions to do these things together. The moment of Europe is completely different from the moment, let's say, of the mega diversity countries. Colombia, Mexico, Indonesia, India, Brazil. But we can do it together. We don't need to do it as we did 1 century ago, 2 centuries ago. We can do it wisely. So it depends on finding institutional arrangements to enable the production of these products, of these markets, at the same time preserving the values, the biodiversity, the forests, the environment of those who depend on them to live. This is a matter of discussion about development and growth. And I think that today we have exceptional minds discussing these things. The challenge is to put them together and to influence our leaders, our political leaders, to ensure that we find the right way to do it. Otherwise, we will destroy our planet. And unfortunately, we can't go on in this path anymore. Natura is a leading example for Brazil. It's a motive for national problem of pride. The school, we're trying to form people to work in this sort of companies. And we want to form people also for this new world. And this new world has a premise that you have to protect, you have to preserve, you have to ensure sustainable development. Otherwise, you will not have development for anybody anymore. Thank you.
Any final thoughts from you, Marcelo?
Yeah, just to thank a lot the invitation from FGV, from Fundação Getúlio Vargas, from the Financial Times, to thank a lot the kind words from my dear friend, Professor Gaetani. I think at Natura we are trying to do our best to really set the goals for ourselves and the way we operate throughout the years. I think there is a big change in the world that sometimes we do not see in different geographies, but what I can tell operating now on a scale where we unify countries as different as Brazil, UK, and Australia, at least, where our companies are, is that we foresee a movement in the sense that Professor Gaetani is saying. And I think management is becoming more and more interesting in new ideas, new frameworks. I think to an executive that nowadays is trained only to hold the P&L and to be accountable for the last line is no longer the executive that will provide the best funding for its institution and the best way to connect to the other dimensions of the business. I think sustainability is really about placing different aspects of the operation with the same level and the same amount of importance, but it's not a conversation that only takes NGOs and academics. It's a business conversation. It's about reading what is not written, what is not written in the report. It's about reading what is invisible to the normal report, but it's very interesting for investors and for policymakers. So making a sustainability more and more common practice in the administration, I think is what FGV is trying to do. And I think that's where the world is heading to in every geography where we operate. That's driving more and more concern and attention. So I think conversations like this one are really important for me to learn as well with you guys on where you see where the world is going to. And again, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
We have some questions coming in from the audience, actually, Marcelo. I wanted to see if you had time to respond to these quickly. Can you talk a little bit more about Nature's actions toward the national policy for solid waste? Do you have any familiarity with this and how Nature might be responding?
So I do have, and we discussed that a lot, especially I think the question comes from Brazil, right? So for the Brazilian market, there is a program. So Brazilians set standards and a law for waste back in 2010. It became effective in 2015. We helped to drive the whole consumer goods agenda on that and to build a program that at the same time not only tackled the waste management program, but also the figure of those who are working in that industry on the basis of the industry, those who are recycling. And so Brazil has the uniqueness of trying to combine those two elements, the environmental element of waste and the social element of those who are in the recycling chain. And we build a program together with our sector. So it's a program from the National Association of Personal Care called Give the Hand to the Future, De Amor para o Futuro. So I've been working very close, so I'm also in the association, and we've been building that program to help drive change of the way that we not only recollect, but we recycle, and we use what nowadays is being called in Europe and the US the green jobs, so jobs that will come to support the green economy. So Brazil has been doing that for the last 5 years, I would say at least. So, and it's been really successful for that aspect of the industry. I think for the industry as a whole, and for the program as a whole, and the way that we would combine the local government with federal metrics, with what companies are doing, we are far from being good. So we gave away a little bit its goals for waste management and should get that back on track. So we are doing that for the consumer goods sector, but it's not enough. There are all the other sectors that should really come together and now hopefully help having new mayors throughout the country running their new administrations. They will pay attention to that important matter that will not only provide more areas for the cities itself, but will provide what is a new economy out of waste, which is really being well handled here in Europe and not that much in Brazil yet, but we see different operations doing quite well in that area. I think Germany has a terrific program for it. Some other countries do extremely well. I think there is a lot of space to grow that in Brazil. We are now using the Nature and Co's capabilities of managing different geographies to exactly track that to provide food traceability in every geography where we are.
And one other Brazilian-focused question. Can you talk about the Amazon rainforest, some of the problems, some of the deterioration of the Amazon rainforest we've seen? How might Natura be thinking about this as part of its sustainability plan?
A lot. So I think that we spent a lot of time, attention, resources. So Natura had a plan a few years ago to not only enhance the way that it works with the Amazon. So we nowadays work with 33 communities in the Amazon, over 5,000 people. We are going to expand that to at least 60 communities. We already manage over $1 billion reais in the region. So that's probably one of the biggest investors in the region, certainly for a way that is positive in terms of nature and in terms of the social and environmental dimensions. Besides that, I think paying for access and benefit sharing, it's something that created a model that Professor Gaetani explained that after many years of discussion in Congress was able to become a national law. So the law that takes care of the genetic sphere also takes care of how biodiversity is being treated, not only for science but for the Amazon as a whole. The way we see it nowadays is we are very concerned about what's going on in the Amazon, very concerned. We see levels of deforestation increasing. We will measure them together with NGOs and partners. We don't see new economic opportunities being delivered, and we are spending a lot of time. So one of Natura's founders, Guilherme Leal, who's a truly sustainability passionate, is spending a lot of time and effort trying to build up collective efforts on a coalition called Consultation for the Amazon, which unifies over 100 major Brazilian personalities to look for a business, not only a business model, but a new development model for the region, so we can put in place a different way of combining people, economy, and the forest itself. I think there is a lot of work to do, but I think we are spending a lot of time on that, trying to accomplish that goal to really create a different pattern for what is half of the Brazilian area, right? So half of Brazil is the Amazon, and people have been there for over 10,000 years. So it's only at the latest 60 years that we really messed up the way to develop the region. It's time for us to look for a new way of development that will take into consideration science together with the economy and with the environment. So not missing any of those topics. Professor Gaetani, please, I'm talking here when the master should be speaking.
Yeah, just to provide a little help, no company can afford the luxury of getting involved in this practice. Unfortunately, the president has a different view, but he was an elected president. We are a democracy. If the US survived Trump, we will survive Bolsonaro also. It's a patience. You have to deal with these things. Sometimes you can't expect this sort of policies being a responsibility of just one man. So the state governments, they play a very important role in the development of the region. The municipalities, civil society has done a wonderful work. Marcelo mentioned briefly a consortium of donors supporting a deforestation mapping program called Map Biomas in order to identify the hotspots of deforestation. They work together with public prosecutors, court of accounts. It's a national effort. And we are many players. We have many players in discussing these things. The novelty is now that the private sector is engaged in these movements. It's not a matter of environmentalists anymore, because they just can't afford the luxury of ignoring it. The products of Brazil now, they have to be certified that they're not contributing to making things worse in the planet. That's the novelty. And now the financial sector internalized these principles. The supply chains internalize the principles. The importers internalize this principle. Okay, we have a president who has a different view. That's life. Let's move on. We have lots of things to do together. It's a governance issue. It's not a government issue anymore. There are many more players involved in these discussions. They are too serious to be responsible exclusively by the federal government. That can help, but we'll have to work harder on these aspects.
Yeah, good point. Great. Okay. Well, again, thank you guys very much for your time here today, and look forward to keeping the conversation going. And feel free to reach out as as you think about these issues and taking a look at what you're headed for 2021, the FT will be covering these topics as we transition to the new year.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Thank you, Professor Gaetani. Bye-bye, everyone.
Marcelo.